Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon watching the stars shift as they dropped out of hyperspace near the Kepler system, and he felt the familiar thrill of exploration that had driven him to become a starship captain in the first place. But today was different, because today they were meeting aliens for the very first time in human history, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. The blue planet ahead of them looked peaceful enough, with swirling white clouds and vast oceans that reminded him of Earth, but the three moons orbiting it were clearly artificial structures that gleamed with metallic surfaces covered in what appeared to be cities or industrial complexes. And Jake knew they were looking at technology far beyond anything humanity had achieved. Commander Lisa Hayes stepped up beside him, carrying a tablet filled with diplomatic protocols and translation programs that the best minds on Earth had prepared for this moment. And she looked as nervous as Jake felt, which was somewhat reassuring because it meant he was not the only one who understood how much could go wrong in the next few hours. The first transmission came exactly at the scheduled time, and the alien voice that spoke through their computers was melodic and pleasant, even filtered through the translation software, and Jake found himself relaxing slightly as the being on the other end welcomed them to Zalathi space and invited them to land at the designated coordinates on the main planet. Dr. Ben Collins had been studying every scrap of information they had gathered about the Zalathi during their approach, and he reported that their initial communications suggested a peaceful civilization focused on art and philosophy and trade, which made Jake wonder why such an advanced species had remained hidden from human detection for so long. The landing party consisted of Lisa as the chief diplomat, Dr. Collins as their expert on alien cultures, and Dr. Amy Foster, who would study any biological samples the Zalathi were willing to share, and Jake insisted on going himself, despite protocol suggesting he remain with the ship because this was too important to delegate to subordinates. The Zalathi city was beautiful in a way that human architecture never quite achieved, with flowing organic shapes that seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built upon it, and the aliens themselves were tall and graceful, with blue skin that shimmered in their planet's unusual light, and large eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Admiral Krell Vostani greeted them at what appeared to be some kind of government building, and his English was flawless, which surprised Jake until he realized that the Zalathi had been monitoring human transmissions for decades and had learned their languages without ever making contact. The first day of meetings went better than anyone had dared hope, with the Zalathi showing genuine interest in human art and music and offering to share some of their own technological advances in exchange for cultural exchanges. And Jake began to think that maybe this would be the beginning of a golden age for humanity, but everything changed. On the second day, when Dr. Collins accidentally triggered a data connection while trying to download some Zalathi historical records, and somehow the aliens gained access to human historical archives that included footage from Earth's many wars and conflicts, Jake watched in horror as Admiral Vostani's expression changed from curious interest to absolute terror when images of World War II battlefields appeared on the viewing screen, followed by footage from Vietnam, and then historical recreations of ancient battles going back thousands of years. The Zalathi began speaking rapidly in their own language, and Jake could see panic spreading through the room as more aliens arrived and started gesturing frantically at the screens that continued to show humanity's violent past with all its glory and brutality laid bare for alien eyes to see. Dr. Foster tried to explain that these were historical events and that humanity had grown beyond such conflicts. But Admiral Vostani was already backing away from them with his large eyes wide with fear, and he spoke in broken English about death worlds and buried monsters and species that should never have been allowed to reach the stars. Within an hour, the humans found themselves escorted back to their ship with polite but firm requests to leave Zalathi space immediately, and Jake tried to argue that they needed to discuss what had happened and clear up any misunderstandings, but the aliens would not listen to reason. As the horizon pulled away from the beautiful blue planet, Jake found himself staring at the tactical displays that showed dozens of Zalathi ships following them to the edge of their system to make sure they actually left, and he wondered what exactly the aliens had seen in those historical records that had frightened them so badly. Dr. Collins spent the journey home analyzing every second of their interaction with the Zalathi, and he discovered references in their language to something called the buried, puns and mentions of death worlds where dangerous species were born, and Jake began to suspect that humanity's reputation among the stars might already be worse than they had ever imagined. The return to Earth was supposed to be triumphant, but instead, Jake found himself filing a report that detailed humanity's first contact as a complete disaster, and he could not shake the feeling that they had just made enemies of the first alien species they had ever met. Lisa tried to maintain optimism by pointing out that they had at least proven that faster-than-light communication was possible and that other species existed, but Jake could see the worry in her eyes when she thought no one was looking, and he knew that she understood the implications just as well as he did. The last thing Admiral Vostani had said before they left was that the galaxy already knew about Earth and about humans, and that they should have stayed buried beneath their own soil where they could not threaten anyone else. And those words haunted Jake during the long journey home, because they suggested that humanity's isolation might not have been accidental at all. Ambassador Kate Williams sat in her office at Luna Station, staring at the message that had arrived through channels she did not even know existed, and the contents made her blood run cold because it was an official communication from something called the Galactic Council, and it was addressed to the government of Earth with a classification that translated roughly as ultimate threat level. 6 months had passed since Captain Morrison's disastrous first contact with the Zalathi, and in that time humanity had tried to make sense of what went wrong while preparing for future diplomatic missions. But now it seemed that future had been decided for them by powers they had never even known existed. The message was written in perfect English, which told Kate that these aliens had been watching humanity for much longer than anyone had suspected, and the formal language could not hide the fear and disgust that permeated every line as they described Earth as a graveyard world, populated by apex predators who had somehow gained access to space travel. Captain Troy Bennett arrived at Luna Station within hours of Kate receiving the message, and his ship, the UES Guardian, carried the most advanced scanning equipment humanity possessed, but even those sensors had detected no sign of the alien vessels that were supposedly monitoring human space. Troy brought with him intelligence officer Ryan Clark, who had been tasked with intercepting and analyzing any alien communications in the solar system, and Ryan's findings painted a picture that was even worse than the official message had suggested, because it seemed that multiple alien species were actively discussing the human problem. The intercepted communications spoke of previous encounters with dangerous species and how the galaxy had dealt with them through isolation and eventual extermination, and Ryan had identified at least 7 different alien languages being used in these discussions, which meant that a significant portion of the known galaxy was involved in deciding humanity's fate. Dr. Helen Park arrived from Earth carrying historical records that she believed might explain why the aliens were so afraid of humanity, and her research had uncovered evidence of unexplained technological advances throughout human history that suggested alien observation going back thousands of years. Helen's theory was that aliens had been secretly monitoring human development and documenting every war, every genocide, every act of violence that had shaped human civilization, and that this accumulated evidence had created a galactic database that portrayed humanity as irredeemably violent and dangerous. Kate found herself in the impossible position of having to defend her entire species to beings she had never met, and who had already made up their minds about humanity's nature, and the formal diplomatic protocols she had trained for seemed laughably inadequate when faced with the prospect of species-wide extinction. The Galactic Council's message included a detailed analysis of human warfare that demonstrated a level of understanding about military tactics and psychological warfare that shocked even Troy, who had studied military history. His entire career, and the aliens seemed particularly disturbed by humanity's ability to adapt and innovate under pressure. Ryan's continued monitoring revealed that the aliens were most afraid of something they called the human learning curve, which apparently described humanity's unprecedented rate of technological and tactical development, and several intercepted messages mentioned that no species in galactic history had advanced as quickly as humans had. Dr. Park's historical analysis supported this alien assessment because she found that humans had indeed developed new technologies and strategies at a rate that was unusual even by Earth standards, and she theorized that constant warfare had accelerated human development in ways that peaceful species could not understand. The most disturbing intercept came from a species called the Vrex, who discussed humanity in terms typically reserved for natural disasters or plague outbreaks, and their communications suggested that they had already begun preparing for what they called a cleansing operation. Kate realized that she was not just dealing with diplomatic misunderstandings, but with genuine terror from species that had apparently never encountered anything like humanity before, and their fear was so profound that they were willing to consider genocide rather than risk allowing humans to spread throughout the galaxy. Captain Bennett reported that his sensors had detected subtle changes in the electromagnetic patterns around Earth's solar system that suggested the presence of cloaked alien vessels, but the technology involved was so advanced that human sensors could barely detect its existence, let alone track specific ships. The Guardian's tactical officer, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Torres, ran continuous simulations based on the limited data they had about alien capabilities, and every scenario ended with humanity's complete defeat within days of any serious alien assault, which meant that diplomatic solutions were their only hope. Ryan intercepted a communication that mentioned something called the Shardian Archive, which apparently contained records of every species the galaxy had encountered over millions of years, and humanity's entry in this archive was classified under a threat category that had only been used 3 times in galactic history. Dr. Park's research into those 3 previous cases revealed that all of them had ended with the complete extermination of the species in question, and the aliens' methods had become more efficient over time, suggesting that they had developed specific protocols for dealing with dangerous species. The final piece of the puzzle came when Kate received a second message from the Galactic Council that contained an ultimatum disguised as a diplomatic offer, and the terms were simple enough that even the translation software could not obscure their meaning. Humanity had 30 Earth days to accept permanent confinement to the Sol system, with the understanding that any attempt to expand beyond their current borders would result in immediate military action by the combined fleets of over 1,000 member species. Kate found herself staring at a choice that no human leader should ever have to make, because accepting the ultimatum meant condemning humanity to eternal imprisonment, while rejecting it meant facing odds that made victory impossible. And either way, human civilization as they knew it was about to end. The intercepted alien communications made it clear that this ultimatum was considered generous by galactic standards, because most of the council members had voted for immediate extermination, and only a small faction led by a species called the Cathani had argued for giving humanity a chance to prove they could be contained. Captain Bennett requested permission to begin preparing Earth's defenses, but Kate knew that even their most optimistic projections gave them no chance against technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed, and any military resistance would only confirm the aliens' worst fears about human nature. As she drafted her response to the Galactic Council, Kate wondered if humanity's greatest achievement might also be their greatest curse, because the same qualities that had driven them to reach for the stars had apparently marked them as monsters in the eyes of every other intelligent species they had ever encountered. The 30-day deadline felt like both An eternity and an instant, because Kate knew that whatever choice humanity made would determine whether their species had a future among the stars or would spend the rest of their existence trapped in the solar system where they had been born. President Charles Adams stood in the Situation Room beneath the White House, surrounded by the best military and scientific minds on Earth. And every face in the room reflected the same grim understanding that humanity was facing an impossible choice between imprisonment and extinction, and the weight of that decision would rest entirely on his shoulders. General Marcus Webb had spread tactical displays across the conference table, showing projected alien fleet positions and defensive capabilities, and his analysis was brutally honest about humanity's chances in any direct confrontation with advanced alien technology that made Earth's most sophisticated weapons look like primitive clubs. The numbers were staggering because intelligence. Estimates suggested that over 1,000 alien species had allied against humanity, and their combined military might represented millions of years of technological development, while human space forces consisted of fewer than 50 ships designed, primarily for exploration rather than warfare. Dr. Ben Collins had spent the weeks since receiving the ultimatum translating every scrap of Zalathi text they had obtained during first contact, and his discoveries painted an even darker picture of humanity's situation because it seemed that the galaxy had been preparing for something like humanity to emerge for a very long time. The ancient Zalathi archives spoke of previous dangerous species that had been identified and eliminated before. They could spread beyond their home systems, and the methods described were efficient and merciless, with entire star systems being sterilized to prevent any possibility of the threat surviving. Dr. Collins found references to something called the cleansing protocols, which had been developed over millions of years specifically to deal with species that showed what the aliens called aberrant development patterns, and humanity apparently exhibited every warning sign that had marked previous extinct species. General Webb argued that resistance was not only possible, but necessary because accepting the alien ultimatum would mean acknowledging that humanity had no right to exist as a free species, and he believed that dying in battle would be preferable to living as prisoners in their own solar system. President Adams understood the general's position, but he also knew that futile resistance would accomplish nothing except confirming the aliens' belief that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to survive, and any hope for humanity's future required finding a third option that no one had yet identified. Ambassador Kate Williams reported from Luna Station that alien monitoring of Earth had increased dramatically since the ultimatum was delivered, and her sensors detected massive energy signatures just beyond the edge of the solar system that suggested the presence of a blockade fleet captain. Troy Bennett had taken the Guardian on reconnaissance missions to the outer planets, and his observations confirmed that humanity was already effectively imprisoned because alien ships had established a perimeter that would intercept any human vessel attempting to leave the Sol system. The alien blockade was invisible to most human sensors, but Bennett's crew had developed new detection methods that revealed the true scope of the forces arrayed against them, and the enemy fleet was larger than anything humanity had ever imagined possible. Engineer Paul Stevens had been working around the clock to upgrade Earth's defensive systems, but his most optimistic projections showed that even their improved weapons would be ineffective against alien shields and armor that had been designed to withstand technologies humanity had not yet invented. Dr. Amy Foster's biological research had revealed disturbing information about the aliens themselves, because her analysis of tissue samples obtained during first contact showed that the Zalathi had been genetically modified for pacifism, and their fear of human violence was literally built into their DNA. The implications of Dr. Foster's discovery were staggering because it suggested that the galaxy had artificially eliminated aggressive traits from its member species, and humanity's natural competitiveness and adaptability represented something that had been bred out of alien civilizations thousands of years ago. President Adams realized that they were not just facing a military threat, but a fundamental incompatibility between human nature and the galactic civilization that had evolved without the driving forces of competition and conflict that had shaped humanity's development. Captain Emma Rodriguez commanded the frontier station Olympus at the edge of the solar system, and her reports described the slow but steady approach of alien vessels that maintained perfect formation while broadcasting warnings in dozens of languages for any human ships to turn back immediately. The alien ships themselves were unlike anything in human design philosophy because they appeared to be grown rather than built with organic curves and surfaces that suggested a completely different approach to engineering and technology. Dr. Collins made another breakthrough when he discovered that the Zalathi archives contained detailed records of human history going back to ancient Egypt, and the aliens had been observing and documenting human civilization for thousands of years without ever making contact. The historical records showed that aliens had witnessed every major war and genocide in human history, and their documentation was so complete that it included analysis of human tactical innovations and psychological warfare techniques that even human historians had never fully understood. Rodriguez reported that the alien blockade was not just preventing human ships from leaving, but was also jamming all long-range communications and effectively cutting Earth off from any possibility of contacting other alien species who might be more sympathetic to humanity's situation. General Webb's staff had identified potential weaknesses in the alien formation, but any attack would require sacrificing most of Earth's space fleet for a minimal chance of breaking through, and even success would only delay the inevitable alien response. President Adams found himself studying the faces of his advisors and seeing the same desperate hope that had sustained humanity through its darkest periods, but this time, their traditional solutions of innovation and determination seemed inadequate against forces beyond their comprehension. The deadline was approaching rapidly, and Adams knew that whatever choice he made would be judged by future generations, if humanity survived long enough to have future generations, and the weight of that responsibility was unlike anything any human leader had ever faced. Dr. Foster's continued research revealed that human aggression and adaptability were not unique in the galaxy, but rather represented traits that had been systematically eliminated from other species through genetic modification and social engineering over millions of years. The alien fear of humanity was not based on what humans had done, but on what they represented as a reminder of what all sapient species had once been before the galaxy had chosen the path of enforced pacifism and genetic modification. Engineer Stevens completed his defensive upgrades but privately admitted to President Adams that they were essentially meaningless against the level of technology that the aliens possessed, and any defense of Earth would be more symbolic than practical. As the final day of the ultimatum arrived, President Adams realized that he was not just choosing between freedom and imprisonment for humanity, but between representing the natural development of intelligence and accepting the alien model of artificially controlled evolution. The alien fleet had moved closer to Earth, and their ships now filled the space around the outer planets with a presence that was impossible to ignore, and Captain Rodriguez reported that some of the alien vessels were larger than Earth's major cities. Dr. Ben Collins stood in the newly constructed underground facility beneath the Antarctic ice, where humanity's greatest minds had gathered to solve the mystery of why the galaxy feared them so much. And after months of analysis, the picture that emerged was more complex and terrifying than anyone had initially understood. The alien blockade had been in place for 8 months, and during that time, Earth's scientists had made breakthrough discoveries about humanity's true place in galactic history by combining archaeological evidence with the vast database of alien communications that Ryan Clark continued to intercept. Dr. Nina Walsh had joined Collins in the Antarctic facility, and together they had uncovered evidence that alien visitors had been coming to Earth for over 50,000 years, leaving behind subtle traces that previous archaeologists had dismissed as natural formations or unexplained anomalies. The pattern that emerged from their research showed that aliens had observed Every major turning point in human development, from the first use of tools to the development of agriculture to the Industrial Revolution, and they had documented humanity's rapid advancement. With growing alarm, Collins discovered that the aliens had a specific term for species like humanity, which translated roughly as evolutionary accelerants, and these species were apparently so rare that most galactic civilizations had never encountered one before. Earth made contact. The alien fear was not just about human violence, but about the rate at which humans developed new technologies and adapted to changing circumstances, because in galactic terms, humanity had achieved spaceflight in an impossibly short time span. Captain Jake Morrison had been reassigned to lead Earth's intelligence-gathering efforts, and his team had developed new methods for intercepting alien communications that revealed the true scope of the galactic response to humanity's emergence. The intercepted messages showed that the Galactic Council had convened emergency sessions to discuss the human problem, and representatives from species that had not communicated with each other for thousands of years were now working together to contain what they saw. As an existential threat, Dr. Amy Foster's biological research had expanded to include analysis of alien genetic samples obtained through various means, and her findings suggested that most galactic species had reached an evolutionary plateau millions of years ago and had stopped developing new capabilities. The genetic evidence showed that aliens had deliberately modified themselves to eliminate traits like aggression, curiosity, and rapid adaptation that they associated with dangerous evolutionary. Instability and humanity represented everything they had tried to breed out of themselves. Lieutenant Scott Parker had been monitoring alien ship movements around the solar system, and his data revealed that the blockade was not just defensive, but was actually a research operation designed to study humanity from a safe distance. The aliens were particularly interested in human communication patterns and social structures because their own societies had apparently evolved into rigid hierarchies. That never changed while human civilization continued to develop new forms of organization and cooperation. Dr. Foster made a disturbing discovery when she realized that the aliens were not just studying current humans, but were also conducting archaeological surveys of Earth's past, and they seemed to be building a comprehensive database of human evolutionary development. Collins found evidence that some alien species had tried to guide human development in the past by introducing certain technologies or ideas, but these attempts had failed because humans invariably took the alien gifts and developed them in unexpected directions. The ancient alien observers had been particularly disturbed by humanity's ability to turn any tool into a weapon and any defensive technology into an offensive capability, and their records showed growing concern about what humans might accomplish. Once they reached space, Captain Morrison's team intercepted communications suggesting that some alien species wanted to study humanity more closely while others demanded immediate extermination, and the debate was apparently causing significant political instability within the Galactic Council. Dr. Walsh discovered that the aliens had a classification system for dangerous species, and humanity had been assigned to the highest threat category based not on their current capabilities, but on projections of what they might become given enough time and resources. The alien projections suggested that humans would eventually develop technologies that could threaten the stability of galactic civilization itself, and their models predicted that humanity would continue accelerating their development, rather than reaching a stable plateau like other species. Collins made a breakthrough when he realized that the aliens' fear was based on their own history, because the galactic civilization had apparently been shaped by a previous encounter with an evolutionary accelerant species that had nearly destroyed everything before being eliminated. The historical record spoke of something called the predecessor crisis, when an unknown species had developed reality-altering technologies before being stopped by the combined efforts of every other civilization in the galaxy, and the aftermath had led to the current system of controlled evolution. Dr. Foster's research revealed that every member species of the Galactic Council had been genetically modified to prevent them from developing the same dangerous capabilities. As the predecessors and humanity's natural evolution represented a return to the very traits the galaxy had worked to eliminate, Captain Rodriguez reported from Olympus Station that the alien blockade had expanded to include massive construction projects in the outer solar system, and it appeared that the aliens were building permanent installations designed to contain humanity indefinitely. The alien construction projects were on a scale that dwarfed anything humans had ever attempted, and they seemed to be creating a prison that would ensure no human technology could ever break through the barriers they were establishing. Engineer Paul Stevens had been analyzing the alien construction techniques, and his findings suggested that the containment system was designed to adapt and strengthen itself in response to any human attempt to overcome it. Dr. Collins realized that the aliens were not just imprisoning humanity, but were conducting a long-term experiment to see if humans could be forced to evolve along the same controlled path that had been imposed on other galactic species. The intercepted communications revealed debates about whether humanity could be modified to remove their dangerous traits, or whether they were too fundamentally different from other species to be safely integrated into galactic civilization. Ryan Clark discovered that some alien factions were arguing for a middle path that would involve limited contact with humanity under carefully controlled conditions, while others insisted that no contact was safe regardless of precautions. The most disturbing intercept came from a species called the Eternals, who claimed to have survived the predecessor crisis, and who insisted that humanity showed all the same warning signs that had marked the previous dangerous species. Dr. Walsh found evidence that the predecessors had also been evolutionary accelerants who had developed too quickly for the galaxy's safety, and their final technologies had been so advanced that they had begun rewriting the fundamental laws of physics. Collins realized that humanity was trapped not just by alien technology, but by galactic trauma from an ancient catastrophe that had shaped every aspect of their civilization, and their response to humanity was driven by memories of near extinction. The research team began to understand that they were not just dealing with xenophobia or misunderstanding, but with a rational response from species that had barely survived an encounter with creatures very much like humans, and who were determined never to face such a threat again. Admiral Sarah Mitchell was reviewing defensive positions around Earth when the emergency signal arrived from the galactic monitoring stations, and the message that followed changed everything humanity thought they knew about their situation, because something called the Devourer fleet had arrived at the edge of the galaxy and was systematically destroying entire star systems. The alien transmission came through channels that had been silent for the 2 years since humanity's imprisonment began, and the voice of Admiral Krelvostani carried a desperation that the translation software could barely convey as he requested immediate assistance from the species they had once feared above all others. Captain Emma Rodriguez received the first detailed reports from her monitoring station at Olympus, and the data that poured in from alien sources painted a picture of destruction on a scale that no one in human history had ever imagined possible, because entire solar systems were being stripped of all matter and energy. The Devourers were unlike anything the galaxy had encountered in millions of years of recorded history, because they adapted to every defensive strategy and learned from every encounter while showing a level of tactical sophistication that suggested intelligence far beyond any known species. Dr. Ben Collins worked around the clock, translating alien communications about the Devourer threat, and his analysis revealed that these beings were not just destroying worlds, but were somehow incorporating the knowledge and capabilities of every species they encountered. The Galactic Council's response to the Devourers had been based on millions of years of successful military doctrine, but every strategy they employed was countered within hours, and their most advanced weapons were somehow turned against them by enemies who seemed to understand their technology better than they did. General Marcus Webb studied the alien tactical reports with growing amazement because the Devourers were using strategies that he recognized from human military history, including deception, misdirection, and the kind of adaptive thinking that the galaxy had tried to eliminate from its member species, Captain Troy. Bennett took the Guardian on a reconnaissance mission to the edge of human space, where refugee ships from destroyed alien worlds were gathering, and his crew became the first humans to see the aftermath of a Devourer attack. The destruction was total and absolute, with nothing remaining of what had once been thriving star systems, except empty space that seemed somehow darker than the normal vacuum between stars, and Bennett's sensors detected residual energy patterns that suggested reality itself had been fundamentally altered. Dr. Amy Foster analyzed biological samples from alien refugees and discovered that the Devourers left behind a kind of psychic contamination that drove survivors to madness unless they received immediate treatment, with technologies the galaxy did not possess. Admiral Vostani's second transmission was even more desperate than the first, because the Zalathi homeworld was now directly in the path of the advancing Devourer fleet, and their people faced extinction. Within days, unless someone could find a way to stop an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Captain Jake Morrison found himself in the surreal position of coordinating with alien commanders who had previously considered him a threat worse than extinction. And the irony was not lost on him that humanity's supposed monstrous nature was now their greatest hope for survival. The alien military reports revealed that the Devourers were particularly effective against species that followed predictable tactical doctrines, and their ability to counter galactic strategies suggested that they had encountered similar civilizations before. Dr. Collins made a crucial discovery when he realized that the Devourer tactics were specifically designed to exploit the genetic modifications that the galaxy had imposed on its member species, and their attacks targeted the very traits that made galactic civilizations stable and predictable. Human military analysts studied the alien reports and identified patterns that galactic strategists had missed because human tactical thinking was based on deception and adaptability rather than the rigid hierarchies that dominated alien military philosophy. President Charles Adams faced the most difficult decision in human history when he realized that helping the galaxy might be humanity's only chance for survival, but it would also mean unleashing the very capabilities that had made aliens fear them in the first place. The Galactic Council's formal request for assistance was unprecedented in their recorded history because it meant acknowledging that their controlled evolution had created a fatal weakness that only humanity's dangerous traits could overcome. Admiral Mitchell began organizing Earth's military response while privately wondering if this was exactly the scenario the ancient predecessors had faced before they became the threat the galaxy still feared. Engineer Paul Stevens worked to adapt human weapons and tactics for use against enemies whose capabilities far exceeded anything in human experience, while knowing that failure would mean extinction for every intelligent species in the galaxy. The first joint planning session between human and alien commanders was awkward beyond description because species that had never spoken to each other were now forced to coordinate with beings they considered evolutionary aberrations. Captain Rodriguez reported that the Devourer fleet was advancing faster than expected and that several major alien strongholds had fallen in the time it took to organize the joint response, which meant they had perhaps weeks rather than months to develop effective countermeasures. Dr. Foster's analysis of Devourer technology revealed that these beings had somehow transcended the normal limitations of physical matter, and their weapons operated according to principles that human science was only beginning to understand. The alien refugees brought stories of Devourer tactics that defied everything. The galaxy thought they knew about warfare because these enemies could appear anywhere without warning and seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. Collins discovered that the Devourers had been systematically studying galactic civilization for thousands of years while remaining completely undetected, and their attack patterns showed intimate knowledge of every species' weaknesses and defensive capabilities. Admiral Mitchell realized that humanity's best hope lay not in matching Devourer, technology, but in using the kind of unconventional thinking that had made aliens fear humans in the first place, because predictable responses were exactly what these enemies expected. The Joint Command Center established on Luna Station became a strange mixture of human chaos and alien order, as species that had evolved along completely different paths struggled to work together against a common threat. General Webb discovered that human tactical innovations from Earth's violent history provided solutions to problems that had stumped galactic military leaders for millennia, because the aliens had forgotten how to think like predators. The final piece of the puzzle came when Dr. Collins realized that the Devourers were not just destroying civilization, but were feeding on the very order and predictability that the galaxy had spent millions of years creating, and humanity's chaotic nature might be poisonous to them, as the combined fleet prepared for its first engagement with the Devourer. Fleet Admiral Mitchell understood that they were not just fighting for survival, but for the right of intelligence to remain wild and dangerous, rather than controlled and safe. The battle for the Zalathi homeworld began before dawn, on what would become known as Liberation Day, and Admiral Sarah Mitchell watched from the command deck of the UES Defiance as human and alien ships moved into position around the blue planet. That had started humanity's journey into galactic politics. General Marcus Webb had spent 3 weeks teaching alien commanders tactics that their species had never developed, because their genetic modifications had eliminated the psychological traits necessary for deceptive warfare, and the results were both fascinating and terrifying to witness. The Devourer fleet that approached Zalathi space consisted of vessels that seemed to exist partially outside normal reality, and their weapons could unmake matter at the quantum level, while their shields adapted instantly to any attack pattern the galaxy had previously developed. Captain Jake Morrison led the first wave of ships into battle, using strategies that he had learned from studying. Ancient human conflicts and the alien crews that fought beside him struggled to understand tactics based on acceptable losses and calculated sacrifices. The opening engagement revealed immediately why the galaxy had been losing to the Devourers. Because these enemies could predict and counter every standard tactical response within minutes of its implementation. But they seemed confused by human innovations that prioritized adaptation over doctrine. Captain Troy Bennett executed a maneuver that he called controlled chaos, where human ships deliberately scattered their formations and attacked from random directions while maintaining coordination through methods that even their alien allies could not understand. The Devourers responded to Bennett's tactics by attempting to analyze the pattern of human attacks, but there was no pattern to analyze because the humans were improvising their strategy moment by moment based on battlefield conditions rather than following predetermined plans. Dr. Ben Collins monitored alien communications during the battle and discovered that the Devourers were transmitting confusion signals for the first time in their recorded history because they had never encountered enemies who could think faster than their adaptive systems could learn. Admiral Krell Vostani commanded the Zalathi Defense Fleet with strategies that Webb had taught him during their brief alliance, and the sight of peaceful aliens using human deception tactics was both inspiring and disturbing to the human observers. The tide of battle turned when Captain Emma Rodriguez realized that the Devourers were most vulnerable during their adaptation cycles, and she coordinated a series of attacks that changed tactics faster than the enemy could analyze. And Respond engineer Paul Stevens had modified human weapons to create what he called chaos rounds that behaved differently each time they were fired, and the Devourers could not adapt to weapons that had no consistent behavior pattern to learn from. The breakthrough came when Dr. Amy Foster discovered that the Devourers fed on order and predictability, and that exposure to human chaos was actually causing them physical damage at the cellular level, because their biology required stable patterns to maintain coherence. General Webb implemented a strategy that he had learned from studying ancient Earth guerrilla campaigns, where small human ships would strike at Devourer vessels and then retreat in seemingly random patterns that gradually wore down the enemy's ability to maintain formation. The alien crews that fought alongside humans reported that watching human tactics was like observing controlled insanity, because the humans seemed to thrive in situations that would paralyze other species with indecision and uncertainty. Captain Morrison led a desperate assault on the largest Devourer vessel, using a tactic that he called honorable suicide, where human ships would ram enemy vessels while their crews escaped in life pods, creating explosions that the Devourers could not predict or prevent. The climactic moment of the battle came when Admiral Mitchell realized that the Devourers were trying to impose their own order on the chaos of human tactics, and she ordered every human ship to attack simultaneously, using completely different strategies. The result was a level of tactical chaos that overwhelmed the Devourer adaptation systems and caused their formation to collapse as individual. Vessels found themselves unable to coordinate with each other while under attack from enemies who refused to follow logical patterns. Dr. Foster's real-time analysis showed that prolonged exposure to human chaos was causing the Devourer fleet to literally fall apart at the quantum level because their existence depended on maintaining perfect order and predictability. The Zalathi homeworld was saved when the last Devourer vessel simply disintegrated after being exposed to what Colonel Frank Torres called weaponized randomness, where human attacks became so unpredictable that they violated the physical laws the Devourers used to maintain cohesion. In the aftermath of the battle, Admiral Vostani transmitted a message to the Galactic Council. That would change humanity's status forever, because he finally understood what the aliens had failed to recognize about human nature. The humans were not monsters who needed to be contained, but guardians who became monsters when necessary, and their willingness to embrace chaos and unpredictability was exactly what the galaxy needed to defend against threats that fed on order and control. Captain Rodriguez received reports from across the galaxy showing that human tactics were being studied and copied by alien species who finally understood that their genetic modifications had left them vulnerable to enemies like the Devourers. Dr. Collins discovered that the ancient predecessors had not been destroyed by the galaxy, but had evolved beyond physical existence and become the Devourers who returned periodically to test whether younger species had maintained the chaos necessary for true survival. The revelation that the Devourers were evolved. Predecessors explained why they understood galactic technology so well, and why human chaos was so effective against them, because they retained memories of what intelligence looked like before it was artificially controlled. General Webb found himself in the unprecedented position of training alien military officers in human tactical philosophy, and the transformation of peaceful species into effective warriors was both necessary and troubling to observe. The Galactic Council's final message to Earth officially lifted the quarantine and invited humanity to join as full members. But the invitation came with the understanding that humans would serve as the galaxy's military specialists and chaos agents. Admiral Mitchell accepted the galactic invitation while privately noting that humanity had gained exactly what they had wanted all along, which was recognition and acceptance, but the cost had been revealing their true nature to species that would never fully trust them. President Charles Adams addressed the joint human alien fleet from Luna Station and acknowledged that humanity had found their place in the galaxy not as explorers or diplomats, but as the species that other civilizations called when monsters needed to be buried. The final irony was that the galaxy's fear of humanity had been justified all along, because humans were indeed dangerous and unpredictable. But that danger was exactly what had saved every intelligent species from extinction at the hands of enemies who fed on safety and order. Captain Morrison reflected that perhaps being called monsters was not the worst fate for humanity, especially if it meant that the real monsters would think twice before threatening the innocent, and that fear could be a form of protection for those who could not protect themselves. The galaxy learned that Earth was called a graveyard world, not because humans buried their dead there, but because it was where they buried their enemies, and the monsters that threatened peace were themselves afraid. of what lay sleeping beneath the soil of humanity's birth world.